All right, today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to tackle a 1,500-year-old puzzle about a handful of flour. Yeah, you heard that right. But this isn't really about ancient laws. What we're actually going to do is unpack a really powerful and unique way of thinking, all by exploring just a single page of the Talmud.
Okay, so here's our roadmap. We're going to start with the basic rule about this handful of flour. Then we'll get into the big debate. Where can you actually perform this ritual? We'll look at the arguments, the counter-arguments, this whole logical gauntlet they run it through, and then a really fascinating final twist that reveals a much deeper principle. It all leads to the big takeaway, what this way of thinking is all about.
So every good puzzle has a starting point, right? Ours begins with the Mishnah, which is a foundational text of Jewish law. It gives us the undisputed basic rule for our flour offering.
The central action we're going to be talking about is called the kmitza. It's actually a pretty simple ritual. A priest scoops out a symbolic handful of flour from a bigger meal offering. This little bit gets burned on the altar, and the priests get to eat the rest. Simple enough?
Now the Mishnah is crystal clear on this point. The kmitza has to happen in the temple courtyard. That's our baseline, our starting point. But as you're about to see, things are going to get complicated, fast.
And this is where things start to get really interesting, because now this simple rule gets challenged when a great rabbi comes along and suggests a pretty controversial alternative.
So Rabbi Elazar makes this bold claim. Now, the sanctuary, you have to understand, is the inner, even holier part of the temple. His logic is basically, hey, if it's okay to do it in the less holy courtyard, then it's got to be okay to do it in the more holy sanctuary, right? And on the surface, that sounds pretty hard to argue with.
And this brings up a fantastic question that goes way beyond ancient rituals. When it comes to rules and procedures, is holier always better? Can you actually be too correct? Can you go so far above and beyond that you end up doing it wrong?
Well, you can't have a good debate without a sharp counter-argument, and one shows up right away. But it's not based on some abstract idea. It's rooted in a very specific reading of a biblical verse.
Rabbi Yirmiyah steps in and says, not so fast. He brings up a teaching that says the verse implies the handful has to be taken from a place where a non-priest, the person who actually brought the offering, is allowed to stand. And that place is the courtyard, not the super-exclusive priest-only sanctuary.
So here's our standoff. You've got Rabbi Elazar's logic of holier is better on one side, and on the other, you've got Rabbi Yirmiyah with this scriptural proof that seems to explicitly forbid it. It's a classic legal showdown.
And the Talmud's resolution here is just brilliant. It doesn't pick a side. It reframes the purpose of the verse completely. It says, look, the phrase about where a non-priest may stand isn't there to forbid the sanctuary. It's there to make sure we understand that the entire courtyard is a valid place for the ritual. It's about inclusion, not exclusion.
But wait a second. That answer just opens up a whole new can of worms. I mean, if the verse's whole purpose is to permit the entire courtyard, that implies there was some reason to think it wasn't all permitted. Why would that even be a question?
This is where you really see the Talmudic mindset in action. To figure this out, the sages basically run the idea through a logical gauntlet, a stress test. They start asking, well, could we have learned the location rules by comparing this meal offering to other, more famous sacrifices?
So they start firing off possibilities. Could the meal offering follow the same rule as burnt offerings, which had to be handled on the north side of the courtyard? No? Okay. What about sin offerings, or maybe guilt offerings? They systematically go through and test every single possibility.
Now, what's so cool here is watching how each one of these comparisons is just meticulously dismantled. They say, look, the meal offering can't be like a burnt offering because that one is totally consumed by the fire. It's not like a sin offering because that atones for the most severe sins, and it's not like a guilt offering because that has these really specific rites involving blood. The meal offering, it turns out, is in a class of its own.
So if all those other big comparisons don't work, what was the real concern? The Talmud lands on something much more specific. The verse was needed to fight an argument that, since the offering was first presented at the southwest corner of the altar, maybe the handful ritual had to happen right there too. And the verse comes to say, nope, don't worry about it. Anywhere in the courtyard is totally fine.
Okay, so puzzle solved, right? The holier is better logic seems to work. But just when you think you've got it all figured out, the Talmud throws a curveball. It introduces a new case that seems to completely break the logical model we just spent all this time building.
Another great sage, Rabbi Yochanan, uses the exact same principle as Rabbi Elazar did with the flour. He says, hey, if you can slaughter a peace offering in the courtyard, then you can definitely slaughter it in the even holier sanctuary. The logic seems perfectly consistent. But here's the massive problem. There's a totally different law that needs a special, explicit verse just to allow priests to eat parts of the sacrifices inside the sanctuary. And you have to ask, wait a minute, if the holier is better logic is so solid, why would you need a special verse for eating? Why doesn't the same reasoning just apply? It feels like the whole system has a contradiction.
And this brings us to the final, absolutely profound distinction. The Talmud solves the contradiction by drawing a line between the idea of service and the act of eating. Sacrificing something, well, that's an act of service to God, to a master, and it's perfectly appropriate to do that service in the master's main residence, the sanctuary. But eating, that's different. That's for your own benefit. You don't just casually sit down and eat a meal in the king's throne room. That's an act of personal benefit, not service, and for that, you need special permission.
So, after all that, from handfuls of flour to the proper etiquette of eating in a holy place, what have we actually learned? What is the ultimate point of this incredibly detailed analysis?
See, the real takeaway here isn't the rule about flour. It's the method of thinking itself. The goal was never just to get to the right answer. It was to understand why it's the right answer by stress testing every other possibility you could imagine. It's a system of radical inquiry that challenges every single assumption to build these incredibly profound and durable principles from the smallest, most practical details.
And this ancient legal puzzle ultimately leaves us with a really modern question. In a world full of easy answers and quick takes, what can this 1,500-year-old method of rigorous assumption testing inquiry teach us about how we solve our own complex problems today?